All right, let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Thomas. My name is Claudio, and I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the student Fairfax City. We are very grateful that Thomas Dolby accepted our invitation to our show. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Thank you, Claudio. Nice to be here.
Same here. Let's go back to the beginning in your life, Thomas. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking, I don't know, guitar lesson or piano lesson, like all the kids back in the days?
Tell me about your childhood. So my family were music fans, mainly classical music, but not really participants. And I sang in a choir when I was quite young, and I took a few piano lessons, but I changed schools, and my mum forgot to sign me up for piano lessons when I changed schools, and I was rather pleased because I didn't like him very much. And then I sort of started teaching myself music really when I was maybe 11 or 12 years old. And I actually started with guitar. I could just like strum a folk guitar. And then I switched to piano and I got interested in jazz. And I used to, try and copy some of my favorite jazz pianists by like playing the record at half speed and trying to copy some of the licks. Then I was sort of pretty much self-taught, got interested in electronic music probably as a teenager. At the time, the music that my friends were listening to was sort of what you call progressive music, really. Yes, Genesis, Gentle Giant, Soft Machine, stuff like that. I was very interested in electronic music, and I started to get exposed to a little bit of what we call krautrock. People like Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk and so on. And that was sort of the stamp of approval came on that when David Bowie started working with Brian Eno in Berlin and was making interactive records, with electronic sounds. And so that sort of gave it legitimacy, what I was doing. And it also sort of brought in the let's call it the do-it-yourself age, because up to that point, you could only make a record if you went in a very expensive recording studio, which took funding from, the only organization stupid enough to loan money to a musician, aka a record company. And then you had to get on the radio. And if those ducks didn't get in a row, then nobody was going to hear your music. So it didn't matter. But, after Bowie and Eno and after, the sort of underground UK electronic scene with people like, Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire, then Human League, Gary Newman, Soft Cell, and so on, suddenly it became a possible dream to make music in your back room, with synthesizers and drum machines and so on, and maybe bypass the big record companies and the whole system. So in a way, it was quite punk. It was very different to the punk music that was going on at the same time, but it was as an expression of sort of independence and rebellion. It was quite punk to be working with electronic instruments at that time.
I got you. So at the time, I think I read somewhere that you sang in a choir as well when you were like 10 or 11 as well, right? So you have
yeah. Yes, I mean, British schools in those days, you had to go to church every morning, and I was kind of bored by that, but it was more interesting to sing in the choir. And they made me an alto. Most of the boys were sort of treble singers. They made me an alto, not because I had a better voice, but because I could hear the harmonies. So I've always had a very good ear for harmony. I can listen to music and pick out the harmony parts.
Yeah. How you get a hold of the first synthesizer? Where your parent saw this kid is very inclined toward music. He likes to put things together. We should help him out, or pretty much you did everything on your own? Because your dad is a scholar, an archaeologist. I think he was a professor at Oxford or Cambridge, one of the schools. So no, right?
Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge. Yeah, he was not. My parents didn't really know much about it. I mean, they knew that I was playing keyboards. I had an electric piano, a Wurlitzer first, and my first synthesizer. I mean, I used to go to music shops in London and play synthesizers for hours until they threw me out. But my first one, actually, it was built from a kit. you could get like a sort of DIY kit that you had to solder yourself. And I found somebody had started that project and then thrown it away in a dumpster. And I
Wow.
used that, and I finished the project using a diagram from a popular electronics magazine. And I finished it up, and that was a Transcendent 2000 synthesizer. It had no keyboard on it. So all you could do was turn knobs and hit buttons, and you couldn't play notes with it at the beginning. But I eventually, after that, Moog came out with an affordable synth called a Micro Moog, which could play one note at a time and had no memories on it. And that was the first one that I actually bought. But I left school at 16, and I was working in a fruit and vegetable shop in Notting Hill Gate, and I managed to save up enough money to put a down payment on the Micro Moog.
Watch. And your dad being a scholar, that allow you to leave school at the time, or?
I mean, I had 5 older siblings, and most of them were quite academic. And I think by the time it got to me, my parents just wanted me to be happy, really, so they're very supportive. I never really applied myself at school. I did okay at school, but I never really applied myself. And I think the first time my parents saw me actually get focused was on music. And so they were happy for me.
Similar background. I come from a family of academia as well. Both my parents and my sister, I have a lot of scholars. I was the black sheep of the family that when I was a rebel, wanted to listen to music. So that's why I ended up in this country, believe it or not. But it's great. I read your recent autobiography called The Speed Sound, Breaking the Barriers Between Music and Technology. What was you have so many stories in that book. What was the main motivation to put in that book together or writing it to begin with? So.
I mean, I had a lot of stories. I mean, I've always been very attracted to adventure, so after I first got well known in the early 80s, I got a lot of interest from other artists that had never heard anything like me. So I would read an interview, with some artist, and they would compliment me on my music. And sometimes I was able to get in touch with them and say, hey, thanks for saying what you said. You want to do something together. And so I got to meet a lot of my heroes, and I had some great experiences with them, some great adventures. And, over the years, I've told those stories many times about David Bowie, about Michael Jackson, about Joni Mitchell, or whoever, Roger Waters. And my friend Matthew Seligman, my bass player, said, you're a really good storyteller. The way you tell stories is really good. You should write. And so Matthew was really the inspiration for writing a memoir. And I think the fact that I had a second chapter to my career in Silicon Valley in the tech world was an interesting contrast to the music world. And so that's what really gave me the idea of, writing a memoir that covered those 2 eras.
And some year later, you end up here living in the United States, in Baltimore. What was the move from the UK to here? I think your wife is American as well, right? So eventually you settle down here, you have your kids, and right?
Yeah, my wife is from New York. My 3 kids were born in California when we were living there. And we moved back to England when my kids were high school age, because the California schools were very bad, and we didn't want to put them in private school. But the state school near our house in England was a very good one, so we decided to try living there, while they were teenagers. And that went very well. I was only working for myself then, just doing some music projects. And my wife, her dad, is elderly. Her sister is not very well, and we wanted to be close to the family. And so I got offered a job at a university in Boston, and I didn't like it very much, but I was kind of amazed that they would offer me a job, given that I have no degree. I left school at 16. But they offered me, a professor of the practice, which is like a concept of, we need professors that have recent experience out in the workplace that are not purely academic. So I was very flattered that they would offer this to me. just didn't like Boston, didn't like the university very much. But I got out a map and looked at the East Coast, somewhere that would be close enough to get back to New York. And I found a job posted on the Johns Hopkins University website in Baltimore, looking for somebody to teach film music part-time. And I applied for it on the off chance, and they said, actually, we've got something even better for you, and that is we're opening a film center, and you could help design the audio there and the program to teach in it. So they offered me like a 3-year gig, and I took that. My wife and I moved to Baltimore, and we really liked Baltimore as a place to live, got very fond of it. So at the end of the 3 years, I sort of, I asked the university if I could create a new course all of my own. And they have a conservatory called the Peabody Conservatory, which is a music and dance conservatory. Beautiful old place, actually the oldest conservatory in the USA. And so I created a course there in music for new media, which is basically to teach undergraduates and now postgrads as well to write music for picture, whether it's film, TV, video games, virtual reality, installations, any kind of music that is, secondary to a visual. So I've been running that course for a few years, and it's become very successful. We still love living in Baltimore. So here is what I am for now.
Good for you. Good for you, man. Does allow you to, as I read somewhere, that go to New York and, for your wife to be happy as well, and so forth. So, feel free to elaborate on how you end up with the last name Dolby. I think not many people know, but you were not born Thomas Dolby, and I think it was another musician that have the same last name, and feel free to elaborate on that.
Yeah,
I think I lost you.
So when I was at school, I was the first kid to get a cassette player, and it was this big heavy thing with a leather strap I wear around my neck, and really high quality cassette player. It had to have a Dolby button, so I was always telling people about the Dolby button, and so they nicknamed.
Yeah, so you adopted the stage name Thomas Dolby to avoid confusion with the British singer Tom Robinson, right? That correct?
Yeah, so I got the nickname Dolby in school. I was the first kid in school with a cassette player, and it had a Dolby button, so they called me Dolby. And then, I left school, and there was this guy Tom Robinson that was out there. I was Tom Robertson, and we sort of made a deal that whoever got famous first, the other one would change his name. A few weeks later, he was in the charts with 2468 Motorway, so I was the one that changed my name. So I reverted to my school nickname.
I got it. Perfect. Yeah, that's although you are best known for your career as a musician and a producer in the 80s, you reinvented yourself as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and I think you end up you founded Bitnik, a Silicon Valley software company. So feel free to elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, so at the end of the 80s, I was sort of bored with the music industry, and it was pretty rotten, I thought, at that point. But I'd been working closely with some software companies on the music software that I was using, and I was very intrigued by that. And so I moved to Silicon Valley to consult with them. And after a while, I decided that I wanted to start my own company because the web was beginning to happen in the beginning of the 90s. And I could see a very good way to do music on the web. Music on the web at the time was very low quality because it was streaming like real audio, and it sounded horrible. And I thought that using MIDI, for websites would be a really cool way to do sound on the web. So in those days, it's pretty easy to get funding, from venture capitalists because everybody was pouring money into the internet. And so I had a company for a while, and we had lots and lots of views and downloads of our free software, but it was very hard to make any money in the internet in those days. And at the end of the century, a lot of small startups, went up in smoke. We probably would have done the same thing if it hadn't been for one deal, and that was with Nokia. And Nokia came to us. We created a very small, efficient synthesizer called the Beatnik synthesizer. And Nokia came to us. They were looking for a way to do polyphonic ringtones in their phones, and they licensed it from us. And then we sort of pivoted and went over to, doing this for mobile phones, and we finally made some money. Um, and but it was limited interest to me. I didn't really dig the whole ringtone thing. And it was sort of ironic that a guy that was known for sort of bringing the warmth and humanity to synthesizers had now created this pokey little 4-voice synthesizer that went dee 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 dee, and it would annoy everybody, and that's what I was getting famous for. So I sort of I quit that. And the ringtone era went away anyway, because after a while you could use just an MP3 file on your phone as your ringtone, so there was no reason for the synthesizer anymore. So it's pretty good that it ended when it did.
Yeah, that's great. I was reading your biography, and I did a little research in the internet, and I'm amazed that you could have many lives, as a record producer, as an entrepreneur, as a visionary guy, a writer, a professor now. For someone that is self-educated, came from modest means. You look back in your life and you say, well, nobody gave me a chance when I was 16, and now I have done well, in terms of what society looks what is important or not, and being famous, and what's how you think about that kind of stuff. I mean, how you manage, and then what the main motivation to accomplish anything. I think you are the type of guy who, like a perfectionist in many ways, you have an idea in your head, whatever it happens to be, and then you go for it. It's hard at the beginning. You try to make it better. Improve the process, whatever is appealing to you, and then you go for it. And many people don't have that skill set, right? Many people give up early in their career, whatever happens to be their career. And by your case, you were, persistent, consistent. You have that in your head, and you make it happen. Feel free to. It's a long-winded question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the skill set for a lot of the things that I do, but I enjoy the process of acquiring the skill set to do something new. It forces me to stretch my horizons and to express myself in new ways. And I'm especially drawn to, technologies that have not been well explored yet. So at each stage in my career, whether it was synthesizers, samplers, MTV videos, video games, the internet, ringtones, I was always drawn to an area where it was just beginning, and artists had yet not defined what was possible in that new medium. And I love the idea of being one of the first people to stumble in there, and express myself in a new medium. So, I mean, I look back at my career, I sometimes think, well, if I was just focused on success and money, then I would have picked one of these careers and just focused on that, because it's like I'm constantly in startup mode, and something new. And that's probably economically not the best idea, but I'm happy, right? I mean, I'm always drawn to creativity. There's always a pile of unpaid bills on my desk because I got sucked into some new creative endeavor, and all of the left brain stuff, I leave that till tomorrow. I'm always drawn to the creative, right brain stuff. I've been lucky because I've been able to survive doing that. Quite comfortable, brought up a family and everything. And so, I think for a lot of people, they give up on their dreams because they find it hard to pay the rent, and they have to be pragmatic and realistic and find a reliable way to make a living. And I've had a string of good luck from the beginning, and I was able to make a living doing the stuff that I love.
Yeah, which is great. What memory do you have from the Marquee Club? I read somewhere you attended that, and many bands. I've been, of course, the Marquee Club. It doesn't exist anymore. I've been in the new building and many times in London, and so many great bands, playing that venue and one to another, and the Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones, the Genesis, the Human League, and many, many, many others. And at the time, I think it used to be back in the day that, of course, that was before the internet, so people were projecting in the back, a slice or a silent movie or black and white movie or whatever it was, and people were listening and drinking beer or whatever. And what memory do you have from this period? And I think,
Yeah, I mean, I used to go quite often, and I was probably underage, but
yeah,
I knew the doorman, and I would just sort of sneak in, and I would get other people to order my drinks for me. Although, the licensing laws in the UK were kind of loose in those days. You could basically get a drink in a pub from age about 14 or 15. Um, but no, I mean, I saw a lot of bands there, many of which were sort of straightforward rock bands. And I think the first sort of avant-garde multimedia band I saw there was the Human League. And they, at that time, Phil Oakey was standing at the front of the stage. He had slide projections behind it. They had a guy in the band that was only there to do the slideshow. And so that was a really interesting application to me of, visuals along with music. And they had, weird slides of sort of, bombed out buildings in Dusseldorf and, vivisection experiments on animals and all sorts of weird stuff. It's very arty and very experimental, and it really inspired me. I saw a lot of different bands there. And when punk rock started, it was a great place to go culturally, and socially. And you really felt like a rebel, sort of pogoing around in the mosh pit with a bunch of punks. But musically, it wasn't very inspiring to me, to hear bands that could sort of barely play three chords. I was a fan of the Sex Pistols and the Clash and people like that. But it was really when punk or new wave music got slightly more intelligent with bands like XTC, Television, Talking Heads, and then Susie and the Banshees and The Cure and so on, that the music became stimulating and inspiring to me, as well as the energy that went along with it. So I saw a lot of great bands at the Marquee Club.
good for you. And not only you became a musician, but at the time, I think you played keys with the Belinda Carlisle on her celebrated Heaven on Fire album. You ended up producing Prefab Sprout album as well. You at the time so as I said before, you have the motivation and the intellectual capacity to not only create your own music, playing somebody else's music, become the producer for some groups and so on and so forth. And you enjoy doing that as well too.
Yeah, I mean, I like taking a back seat sometimes. It's not me in the spotlight. It's like if you produce a band, then they're going to be the ones that have to go out and promote it and, do interviews. And you can move on to your next project. And, when there are musicians that I admire, I'm quite happy to help steer them in the right direction. I'd very varied, experiences with that. I mean, Prefab Sprout allowed me to rearrange and organize their songs for them, for which I'm very grateful. And so I put some of myself into that. But the focus was really on the songwriting, on Paddy McAloon, and who has a very unique voice. And I just wanted to present that in the best light. When I tried to apply the same sort of process with Joni Mitchell, for example, it didn't work so well. Joni was very clear what she wanted, and she really just wanted some keyboard textures from me. And so that was a bit of a disappointment, because I did have a vision for, how she should sound, and, it didn't work out too well. So, experiences varied. Sometimes I was just a keyboard player, and then I would just play whatever notes they told me, with Foreigner and Def Leppard and Malcolm McLaren, Joan Armatrading, Belinda Carlisle, and so on. I was basically a session keyboard player.
Cool. I got you. I selected 3 tracks, and feel free to elaborate on how they came together. I'm thinking you're tired of mentioning what happened with Cheap Like My Science, so I'm not going to pick the one. I have 3. I live that add my favorite track of yours. So the first one, I live in a suitcase. Feel free to elaborate on what came to mind.
Yeah, so I've been living in Los Angeles at that point for a year or so, and I wasn't really sure if that was where I wanted to settle. It's very hard to find the soul of Los Angeles. Um, it lacks a certain soul. It's very plastic in many ways. It's not an old city with an old heart to it. But what I used to like to go and sit up in the hills above the Griffith Observatory, and look out over the city. And one night I was up there and I was looking out over Los Angeles, and there was a power outage, a brownout, and about half the city just went black. Although you could still see the where the freeways were, because you'd see the tail lights or the headlights on the freeways. Um, and at that point, you could see the stars very clearly in the mountains behind, and it really looked to me like it was theatre in the round, with stars instead of a crowd. And so this idea sort of popped into my head. And at the same time, I just sort of felt, well, this really isn't my home, but I'm living out of a suitcase while I'm here. And my true home actually was with Kathleen. And so, I had said, I make my home here inside of you. So that was the genesis of I Live in a Suitcase.
I got you. The second one is Budapest by Blimp.
Again, when I was living in Los Angeles, I had a great time when I made the album Aliens Ate My Buick. I was a crazy bachelor in LA and trying to enjoy it, for what it was good for. And I loved the pulp culture of California. But when I looked back at Europe through an American lens, Americans see Europe as, very ancient, very old, very classical. They see the boulevards and the parks and the statues, and it's like this sort of museum, sort of frozen in time. And yet, the streets of our cities were paved with the blood of Zulus and the ashes of the Jews. And it was just like a way of talking about the discrepancy between the way Americans view Europe and the reality of how those beautiful cities were built, at the expense and the suffering of other countries around the world, that we colonized.
Gotcha. And the last track that I want to bring you to attention is a Screen Kiss, if you remember.
Yeah, so you've really picked my LA period. So
Yes.
actually wrote before I moved to Los Angeles, but it was after a bad breakup, with a very glamorous woman who left me for a Hollywood film producer. So it's like one of my few breakup songs, because I haven't had many breakups in my life, I'm happy to say, which is the source of inspiration for many a songwriter. But that was my bad breakup song. And I called it Screen Kiss because it was like, the relationship that we had was not real. That's the way it felt at the time. It had all been nothing but a screen kiss. So that was that was how that song came about. And it's still one of my favorites. And actually, it's I only discovered recently, it's a very successful rap band called D12 in the early 2000s. And they were actually on Eminem's label. And he was executive producer on their album, and they have a song, like a song that has a lot of views on YouTube, where they basically took the intro to Screen Kiss and they slowed it down and made a loop out of it, and they just rapped over the top. And they never asked my permission, which was really upsetting. So I just discovered this the other day. Unfortunately, there's like a statute of limitations on royalties. So even if I'm playing now, it's not gonna mean anything. But it was a little bit annoying because it's one of my favorite songs, one of my best songs. And the fact that guys, they could have come and asked me and I probably would have given them permission, but it upsets me that they didn't, especially as it's Eminem, who I have a lot of respect for. I think he's like a brilliant wordsmith. He has some questionable attitudes about certain things, but I have a lot of respect for him as a musician. And I would have been very flattered if he'd have come and asked me if he could sample my song. Almost certainly said yes, but there's a standard way of doing things in the industry, and they skip that, and I'm kind of surprised at that and a bit upset.
Absolutely. So we talk about this album, The Flat Air. That's one my top two viewers. Like, this is also an album that came out not recently, but some years ago, This is Hyperactive, which is a combination of both, right? The CD1 and CD2. The other one that I really like is this one. I think it's The Gate to the Mind's Eye. You end up doing writing music for a film, and you that's what nowadays you do a little bit for a living at school. Do you like doing that in the sense that when a director approaches you, you begin working from the script, you begin, or somebody have written the movie, they're like 3/4 down, and they will send you an image, with no sound, and you try to put the transcript together to see how you think the film is going to be done. What end do you prefer? You prefer to work at the beginning, having a script. You have no idea what the movie. Well, you read the script, but you know what the movie is going to be all about, or toward the end, where somebody sends you an image and you go to your studio and then you begin playing keyboards or whatever, because they're two different things, right? So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've only ever done film projects where they told me about the idea up front and I liked it. I've never been called in a project where the film was already finished. And the thing is about doing film music is that somebody else has a vision and you have to respect that. You can't come with your own agenda. You have a client, a customer, and they probably have their own opinions about music. They may not have the language to articulate to you what they want from the music. They probably have a cousin who's in a band, and so they think they know a lot about music, but you have to respect that vision. And at the end of the day, you're just one of a team, along with lighting and makeup and costumes and location, editing. You're one of those names that scrolls past at the end, and you have to be willing to play a role in that team, fulfilling the director's vision. And so it's very different from making music for yourself, where, when I make a record, I only really have to satisfy myself. I hope that other people will enjoy it as well, but there's only one person to please, and that's me. So yeah, it's a different kind of mode to work in. I like to get involved early on, like read the script, go on the set. The downside of that is that sometimes, things look good on paper, but when you actually see the reality of them, it's disappointing. So, for example, in 1985, I was involved in the movie of Howard the Duck, and I'd read the comics and I read the script for it, and I knew George Lucas was producing it, and it seemed like it was going to be a surefire hit. But the shooting process didn't go well, and there was a lot of infighting and a lot of arguing about money and studio executives, and I wasn't at all pleased with the result. And at the end of the day, they spent so much money that my ideas for doing a sort of cartoon-like score, they weren't interested in that. They wanted like a big Hollywood movie score, and that's not really what I do. So I ended up just doing the songs for that project, and the songs are very good. They're actually better than the film, I think. Although the film's become a bit of a cult. And Howard may be making a comeback. I hear he's had a cameo appearance at the end of some, recent Avengers movies and things like that. So we'll see. So, the downside of getting involved early on is that you don't know how the film's going to turn out. If I was willing to wait until the very end, then I could, pick and choose films that I did, based on how they're going to end up.
Well, are you interested in continuing doing that? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
if somebody were to approach you with a good project, a good script, a good idea on paper.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, I've been teaching it now for nearly 10 years, so I need to do a bit more of the actual work, I think, or else I'm just a fraud, like most university professors. But I probably actually have more real world experience than most of my colleagues. But all the same, it's interesting teaching something like that. You learn a lot about it that, when I did it myself, I didn't stop and think, well, what am I doing and why am I doing this? But in order to try and teach that to kids, you have to be analytical and think, what is going on there? So it's something I would definitely like to get back to.
Given the opportunity again. And I noticed that you have three. Look at Spotify, and I want to get your opinion on that. You have 375,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, and dealing with an ethical manager, record companies, Spotify paying just a little bit. You need to have millions of hits to get a check for $20. What could be done in the industry for musician to be paid better, right? As opposed to the other side is in Bandcamp, and I don't think you have your music in Bandcamp. I don't know if you do, but you get paid 90 cents of a dollar, so you get more money come to you, right? For me, Spotify is great because I only pay $10 a month, and I discover thousands of musicians, and I buy a lot of music. As I told you before, my music collection I have music in every floor. I have like $15,000, so 15,000 between CDs, vinyl. So for me, Spotify is great because I only pay $10. I'm selfish. I don't know what happened at the end. From your point of view, well, a lot of people, listen to my music for free, pretty much, and they give me a check for $50 every so often. What the answer? What could be done, right, for to be more equitable, more fair, if you will?
Well, I mean, as you say, it's a great deal for consumers.
Correct. Yeah.
When we were kids, you had to save up your money, go and spend, 15, $20 on an album just because there's one song that you heard on the radio that you liked.
That's right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you had to wait for it to come out, and maybe, your friends would come over and listen to it before they decided if they want to buy it too, and you'd listen to their records. So music was a lot more rarefied when we were a kid. Plus, there are only, 50 or 100 artists a month that were releasing records on major labels, and other than that, there was no music that you could get your hands on. I mean, it was live music, but not recorded music. Now, basically, all the music in the world you can have for $10 a month. So it's fantastic from a consumer's point of view. It devalues music a little bit, I think. And I think, in my kids' generation, they don't place the same rarefied, they don't see it as precious in the way that we did when we were kids. And that's a little bit of a shame. So often they're not very interested in finding out about the artist, listening to their other music. It's just hit driven. And, I think that's a shame. But, things change, they evolve, culturally. There was a golden age, if you like, for pop music, and I think we're probably past that now. This is the sort of age of mediocrity. Really, it's very hard to find really excellent stuff that stands out. But to your business point, it doesn't bother me particularly because I don't rely on Spotify or streaming to make a living. But I think that it's discouraging for young artists starting out if they think, well, unless you have a live show and you can hope to build up your live income, get higher and higher on the bill at festivals and play gigs regularly, you don't really see a way that you're going to make a living as a musician. So I think that's discouraging at a certain level. But the bar is very low for people to just have a go. On your laptop with a couple of $100 worth of kit, you can make an album in your back room or at Starbucks or whatever, and you can get it out there on SoundCloud. You can get it released. You can maybe get some fans, some listeners, subscribers, create a persona for yourself. So the bar for entry is very low for that. And I think that's good. I think there was a time when like 1 in 3 households in the USA used to own a guitar. So a lot of people would learn guitar, like a third of the population would learn to strum a few notes on the guitar, a third of households. And similarly now, it's very easy for common people to make a record. And I think I see that as a positive thing. But I think that, the industry has a problem with this streaming thing because the founders of Spotify are billionaires, and yet a lot of artists are getting paid very small amounts per stream, and the industry has to be a little bit more unified about pushing back on that and making sure that people get fairly paid.
Many bands, also what is positive for you is exposure, because people like me, people over the world with two machine learning algorithm, they recommend me this group, that group, and you get to know a little bit. But it's very very unfair for the musician, obviously. I want to bring your attention a couple of names that are important to me, and feel free to elaborate on how you end up working with Ryuichi Sakamoto.
Yeah, so I actually first worked with Ryuichi's wife of the time, who was named Akiko Yano. I was working in London on a song called Radio Silence, and I wanted a female Japanese vocalist. And Akiko Yano was known there, and and she came to the studio, and she had an entourage with her, and one of them was introduced to me, I thought, as Luigi. And I thought, well, Luigi is unusual, an Italian name for a Japanese gentleman. But
right.
when he sat down at the piano and played, and I put two and two together, it's like, Luigi, Sakamoto Luigi. So we decided to, exchange numbers. And a while later, he sent me over some chords that he'd written and said, could I come up with a vocal for it? And so I wrote the song Fieldwork. And I was in London, he was in Tokyo. We decided to meet in New York to record it. And we had a weird experience because we both checked into the Hilton Midtown, New York, but we were both under assumed names. So we couldn't find each other. And we had to wake up our managers in London and Tokyo so they could connect and we
I see. Yeah.
find out the room number. But it went very well. And then I wrote and directed a video for him for Fieldwork, which you can see on YouTube. Maybe you'll provide the link.
Yeah.
It's a great experience. And I stayed in touch with him over the years. When I first worked with him, he had about 3 words of English. But the next time I saw him, he'd been living in New York for a while. He spoke perfect English. So it's a very interesting experience for me to suddenly be able to communicate, in words, not just music.
That's great. I know my time. Thank you, Thomas. I know my time is up now. And, hopefully when you have time, we can do a part 2. It's a lot of things that I would like to ask you, when you have more time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it for your time. And you're doing great. And I will see you in DC, in a couple months, man.
Excellent.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Bye.